Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm Pa. This is Chase Barney. First and foremost, I would like to thank Carolyn and Allison and Soo Vet for allowing us to be in their space. And then also I want to introduce you to Chase Barney, who is a recent graduate of the University of Minnesota, received a BFA in, studio arts?
BFA,
Received,
Bachelor's of the Arts.
yeah. And then you're also entering graduate school this fall in Chicago.
School of the Art Institute.
Yeah. And then hoping to receive a MFA in ceramics.
Yep. Yeah.
And then can you also tell us where we are and this exhibition, the name of the exhibition?
Definitely. So this is SUVAC, as you mentioned, and the name of the body of work is Too Much of a Good Thing is Wonderful. And I ended up making this work pretty much all during lockdown here in Minnesota. So that was from March of this year, and I think I finished the last piece about 2 weeks ago in June.
Okay.
And then Too Much of a Good Thing is wonderful is the tagline that Liberace would use to close his Vegas show, which I thought was funny because this is a little bit more understated because of just using ceramic material, and it's I thought it was kind of ironic, I guess.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was like the criteria that you gave yourself during quarantine.
Yeah.
Right, is this to use ceramics? And also the show was made possible through the MSAB,
Minnesota State Art Board, which, I feel like I'm a pretty good example of why that kind of funding is exciting and necessary. I was able to be in a studio and have money to buy clay and pay rent on a studio that I had access to. And so I limited myself to those materials that I had available to me, which was clay.
Yeah.
So that was the goal for this show as well.
Can you I feel like it's so important to get to know you because I think like so much of yourself is embedded in this work.
Mm-hmm.
And so can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Are you a native to Minnesota?
Well, no. So I grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah, and I moved here 6.5 years ago.
Okay.
Really love it here in Minnesota, but I grew up in Salt Lake in a suburb, pretty conservative environment, and predominantly Mormon. I grew up in the Mormon church. So like coming here to Minneapolis was like kind of a shock, like a very liberal seeming city compared to like not a liberal city, which I mean, Salt Lake has its good and bad, but overall Utah is a very conservative place. So the shock took a couple years to really wear off. Yeah.
So let's talk about the show. So we know that you gave yourself, you gave yourself sort of parameters, but like where was the inspiration for the show? Like where did the inspiration come from?
Yeah, I think what I originally proposed to do was to kind of create like still lifes and arrangements of things that kind of helped shape my identity, either growing up or now. So I kind of took that as like people, places, things, objects. And I kind of started there. Originally, I think I had bigger plans for like printmaking and photography to be incorporated. But when it got boiled down to just like ceramic objects, I started to think about like the fact that we interact with ceramic. I would say most people are pretty familiar with ceramic as a material. Like you interact with it daily, like your dishware, the toilet, the sink. but seeing it like in sculptural form, I think is sometimes different. And like when you do see it, you sort of expect it to have function. So I was really aware of like not wanting to play into that idea of function completely. And I wanted to kind of create like moments that sort of tell stories.
Yeah. So there are 11 pieces, installations, like here in the space. And so can we talk about this very first piece, which is titled Margaret Fletcher, West Smith, No Photo is Known to Exist, right? Can you, well, first of all, who is Margaret Fletcher? I feel like I know the name, but also I feel like I don't.
Yeah.
So can you, who is Margaret Fletcher, and can you talk a little about this piece? And
so I think the funny thing, like because the show feels a little more understated and like the title sort of promises too much of a good thing. I like the idea of making the titles kind of a mouthful. So as you demonstrated there, it's a lot. So Margaret Fletcher, West Smith, No Photo Known to Exist. It came from my great-great-grandfather. His name is Jesse Nathaniel Smith, and he's the first cousin of Joseph Smith, the founder of the Mormon Church. So I think everyone in Utah kind of claims to have some sort of lineage to Joseph Smith, but we have kind of a surprisingly close lineage there. And he had 5 wives. We have this like genealogy book at home, and in that book it talks about his 5 wives, and Margaret was his second wife, and there's no photo of her. There are photos of the other 4. And the only kind of documentation of her is this drawing, and it says in parentheses under the drawing that the rendering were taken off of photos of her sister, who was actually Jesse Smith's first wife. So Jesse Smith married her sister, and then married her second. And she only gave him 2 kids out of the 42 children that he ended up having. So like, to me, the fact that she like didn't ever have a photo taken of her, like there's only a couple lines of her in the genealogy. She only gave 2 children when the other 4 wives were responsible for the other 40. Like, I started to kind of just imagine like what her value was, and like sort of placed value maybe on like how much she contributed to his line of children.
Yeah, think about like the functionality of her body.
Yeah, exactly. And like making her one of the only 2 objects in the show that have function, which is this like really absurd lamp. So yeah, she just really captured my imagination, and this was one of the first pieces that I started with this winter.
Yeah, well, so, I mean, I think it's like the first piece that greets you when you walk into the exhibition. Also, I think this piece sort of embodied, or definitely gives like prelude to like what you're going to see. I see the bonnet, I see the bowl, right? Like that bowl is something that is like a repeating theme in the work. And also like thinking about like the ruffles too. You know, but also I asked you earlier before we filmed, if this was how she was, like the rendering of her, right? If this was her rendering, and you said no, this actually came from an Avon perfume bottle that you had.
Yeah, so an Avon perfume bottle. My grandma Georgia had this like kitschy little collection of like Avon perfume bottles, and like their torsos would pop off, and it would be like the perfume bottle underneath. And she was the prairie lady, and I really like loved these bottles growing up. And when I was thinking about rendering her, that was like the first thing that came to mind.
Yeah. the blues, I mean, I just think, I think about like your use of color too in all the work that you have. And for me, that becomes really interesting because I think, for instance, I'm also really interested in your use of the symbolism that's like being used in the work, right? Your use of the tiger, your use of like the bowls, your just like these sort of symbolism that is involved in the pieces that you have, and I find them really fascinating. Can we walk over to the installation that you have over here? So, Chase, something that I've in watching your career grow that I'm always really impressed by is your ability to create environments, and I feel like this is like one of the two environments that you've created. And so I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about these pieces. So this piece is titled, what is it? An outdated portrait of the artist. And then the bowl that's hanging is King of the Road, Manly Acceptability. I love. And then this piece over here is titled White Diamonds on a violet bench, also featuring Daisy and Delilah. So I guess can you talk about who Daisy and Delilah are in relationship to your youth? I mean, can you just talk about this?
Yeah. I think I started with this idea of still life, objects being arranged to kind of create a aesthetically pleasing kind of arrangement or image. And then I like the idea the Dutch still life, a lot of times you can look at it and appreciate it for its aesthetics, but then if you are in the know, some of the objects can mean something different, or they have a religious connotation, or they're talking about life or death or birth or Christ or whatever. So that was kind of the jumping off point. I think what ended up happening once putting them all together is they became more like portraiture. So I like the idea of calling that an outdated portrait of the artist. In that I realized as I made most of that arrangement that people probably wouldn't know some of the stuff in there or wouldn't know the significance because it is kind of outdated, and some of it for good reason. And so then when putting it all together, it kind of becomes inside joke, but then also not, because it's you can kind of figure out the puzzle.
Right.
And then for this one, White Diamonds is this perfume from the 90s by Elizabeth Taylor. And I think this portrait, the outdated portrait, sort of shows this insecurity, or for me it feels a little insecure, trying to figure out what's going on as a queer person, and trying to find other queer people or my space. While this one is inspired by Elizabeth Taylor, who is this just man-eating old Hollywood glamour. I don't even know how else to describe her, but she had these commercials in the 90s that were just on repeat for her White Diamonds, and in all of them she'd just kind of strut in, sort of tell the guys what's going on. Usually she was throwing something at them, and then there was diamonds falling from the sky by the end, and that was so counter to everything I'd thought about femininity up to that point. My interactions were with my grandmother and my mother, who were married to the same man for years and years, and here's this woman that was married 7 times, and she's super confident in being sexy and showing cleavage when we were taught not to show skin. There was a queerness about her that I was really attracted to. I don't think at the time I realized it was because like I wanted to be more like her than because I was attracted to her, but that came later. And you know, the more you read about her, like the more there's like these quirky little details about how many Shih Tzu dogs she had over her lifetime. Like, so Daisy and Delilah were the last two Shih Tzu she had before she died. So they ended up outliving her. And like there was something really sweet about that. Like she has a quote that says like some of her best leading men were dogs and horses. And she like, I don't know. So I kind of in lockdown had a lot of time to like really read about these different parts of her life, and like the bow popped up, and then there was the bow on Margaret, and then I started kind of reading about like bows and ribbons and how they can stand in for like social causes, how we use like tying a ribbon around our finger to remember things, like AIDS ribbons, tie a yellow ribbon around the old oak tree. So once I started seeing like these little bows in the Shih Tzu's hair, it's like I would like realize like, oh, bows are a theme here.
Yeah.
And then they keep coming up throughout the show.
Yeah, there also, I want to talk about these, like the ceramics too, right? Like the practicality of ceramics and like how you're, I mean, I think the impracticality of like these objects that you have, right?
Yeah.
And also like some of them are bigger than life and some of them are smaller. And there's this play on size that I think is really important in the work here, and then also with your writing in boys. What is it? The truck.
Yeah.
The
Riding in cars with boys.
Writing in cars with boys, which is which is a piece that we'll get to. But also there's a play on scale that I'm like really fascinated by, and that I think is like really important in the work. Thinking about like these yellow flowers. Thinking about the LA gel bottle that you have, that's maybe life size, but then also like thinking about like these like white diamond perfume that's like, like larger than life, and then also these poodles, right? You have this dog that maybe might be the size of like an actual life-size poodle, but then also like you have these Shih Tzu that are like smaller, right? And so like I'm just like, it's like this back and forth between the figurine and like just the scale. I think for me is like really fascinating. I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit about scale and decisions.
Yeah, I think like one of the things I realized like when sculpting things is that I don't have to be like at the mercy of reality. And so I can like see a figure, like these are kind of based off of figurines that I saw in Elizabeth Taylor's house through this like series of photographs by Catherine Opie, a photographer out of LA. And Elizabeth Taylor like had these like, she basically had Shih Tzu figurines like all over her house. So I was like, well, I want those. So I just kind of decided in my mind how big they were and kind of projected that. And then there were other times where like I actually looked up the dimensions of the object, like the LA looks, where I was like Googling like the size of the bottle, and then I like got a tape measure out and was making sure I was staying. So there were some times where scale felt really important, and I don't actually, now that I'm talking about it, and the band played on the book,
Right.
That's the exact size of the book. And I had my copy of the book next to it as I was sculpting it. So it's like, I don't know why sometimes I felt like I needed to be loyal to reality, and then other times that was like her, or this bow that is big and floppy and weird.
Yeah, I mean, I think about the bows in how they are reoccurring in the work, and I think there's something like really feminine about the bows, right? I just want to think about like the bows and the ways in which they're being used there is like, it's like they're like kind of romantic and like feminine, and like a word that you don't like to use, sentiment. So like those are like I guess I'm thinking about like those things with regards to like the bows and how they show up in in the works here.
Yeah. I think the more I thought about them, like they're like this accessory. They're not really a necessity. Maybe to like tie your shoe, but other than that, like they're kind of just put on as sort of the final touch. Like put a bow on it, or what? I don't know. Is that a saying? So it's like, I don't know. They seem to kind of be like the period at the end of the sentence, and they kind of, to me, they kind of completed each of the little pieces. Like it seemed like they needed a bow.
Do you think they're like exclamation marks, periods, or commas?
I don't know. This one might be a comma, but
you think that's a comma?
Do you not?
I think it's like an exclamation mark.
Yeah, it's pretty.
Yeah,
I
mean it's beautiful.
Thanks.
And it's like, I think for me, like, I think it's the thing that ties the two together.
Yeah. And I like I think being like a young gay kid, or like just being a gay man, I am attracted to beautiful things, and I feel like a trapping that happened a lot for me is like beauty is oftentimes like confused with femininity, and that was always like really frustrating for me. Like I did hair for a while, like I was always attracted to this like these aesthetics, and it was always labeled as like this feminine or kind of gay thing, and that's fine. Like to me that's okay. Like it's sort of embracing these stereotypes. A lot of this work to me is like leaning into stereotypical kind of things, like gay men love little poodles. It's like, of course you're making sculptures of little poodle dogs. And I kind of like, I'm okay. Like I think there was a time where I would be pushing against these ideas of stereotypes, and I don't feel the need to do that. Right?
Yeah. Well, I think about like, I think about like the exaggeration of tropes, and I feel like, I don't know, like maybe I'm like putting words in your mouth, but I feel like maybe that's something, that you're thinking about.
Yeah. I think that's right.
Can we go? So I feel like this space here is for me a cross between like a shrine, right? And so we talked about shrines before this, right? And you said I think the way I think about a shrine may be similar and also like completely opposite of the way you're thinking about shrines.
Yeah.
But I think about shrines in terms of like obsession. And so I think like this environment feels really different from the other, like this other environment that you've created in the room or in the space like next to us. And so I was wondering like if we can go to the other environment and look at that installation, just because it feels so different. And I think for me, the reason why it feels so different is also because of like placement, right? Here, so. So this is another mouthful. I mean, I think, okay, so I just want to recognize that, and I want to say too that I think like the titles for these pieces are really, really important and also like completely insightful. And so I think that like whereas like the work itself is really important, but also like the names of the work is like really important too. Why don't you tell us what this piece is called, what this installation is called?
Okay, so this is Ruby Slipper Red AIDS ribbons tied into pussy bows and lidless poodle urn.
All right. Can you like break that down and talk to us about what's going on like in this installation? Because I feel like this installation feels really different from the other installation. And I think for me, it's like a couple of things, right? It's the pedestal is a lot higher. There's proximity from the pedestal to the wall, right? You have these sort of bowls that are from like literally from ceiling to like the bottom, and also like it's the ceramic piece that is that's on the pedestal is not in the middle. It's slightly shifted to the right. Right, and so can you talk a little bit about like what's happening, what's going on, the name, like what it's referencing?
I think the name, like I felt like it was doing a lot of work, and I kind of like that. Like I think when I'm making ceramic objects, like it's this brown chocolatey like color for a really long time, and color is like really important to my work, but it's like one of the last things that gets added. So as I'm making the object, oftentimes there isn't color assigned to it yet. And when I realized, like after making, I think like 20 of these bows, that they were referencing sort of like AIDS ribbons, and like I was watching a lot of like old Hollywood films and like thinking about Judy Garland and her relationship to like stereotype and icons. And so I wanted the title to kind of, make you think of sort of the history of some of this stuff. So like ruby, slipper, red, AIDS ribbons tied into pussy bows. Like the AIDS ribbon is this thing to kind of signify a social cause that has become kind of an accessory to red carpet events. And then the pussy bow I came across when I was reading about ribbons in fashion, and it's like a term for like the bow on a woman's blouse that's tied like loosely. There's usually like some sort of sash involved, and it came from the term pussy cat bow, which is like the type of bow that would be tied around like a little kitten if you gave it as a gift. So in fashion, it's like a pretty common term apparently, is like pussy bow. And after Trump came out with that video that talked about grabbing him by the pussy, the next day was the debate between him and Hillary Clinton, and Melania wore a pussy bow to the debate.
Right.
So there was this talk online of like, her stylist must have known, like she doesn't know the meaning, did she do this on purpose? So it was interesting to me that like, just this bow was able to do so much on its own.
Yeah.
So these are pussy bows apparently.
And then also again thinking about this sort of the recurring themes, right? So thinking about like these like gold poodles that are on the side of this urn that you have, right? But also like it's on this elevated platform that is a lot higher than the other platforms that you've had. You can't see inside of it, right? So it's like you don't know if it's an actual urn or not. I'm thinking about like the way like you've like glazed it, the the hearts, the glass like glaze on top of it. There's just like there's just a lot to think about, and also thinking about like past elements that you used in previous work, right? So like these, just the what are these like fringe, right? Yeah, like just in thinking about that. I feel like this installation is really different from the other installation.
Yeah. I think the other installation I'm like create that other space definitely I'm telling a story. And this one I just kind of want to present information and then allow you to kind of hang out with it maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, I like the idea that you can't inside the vase, like by calling it a lidless urn, you're sort of worried about what could possibly be in there. It's almost like a precariously tall pedestal.
Right.
You know, and height is a thing for me that I think about a lot, just being taller. So yeah, I don't think this one's quite as like resolved or like a complete story in the same way that maybe another space was.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I would push against that.
Yeah.
I would say that they're really different. I think that like you're absolutely right in thinking about like in this space, like just thinking about like the name of the like this piece, and then all of that information and how one digests the information and how like a viewer can come in and can assign the information onto like the different elements of the installation and to think about you know whatever it is that they are thinking about when they're looking at this. But I think like right here becomes more open-ended than the other piece.
Yeah.
I feel like the other pieces are like here are these like factual things and like the way that it's presented is really different.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can we go and talk about your truck? Riding in cars with boys. So I actually really like this piece. I think like for me like it is like the thing that maybe I am most like I recognize like the most, but I also love the name. You know, and I also like there's a lot of elements that I like that I'm really interested in, and I want you to talk about them, right?
Okay.
So like first and foremost, like this truck that you've that you've made, and then like the cracks in the trucks. Also the bed of this truck and these larger than life like fruits. You know, like. Yeah, a fruit bowl, and then like also like and like having this pink bowl that is right on top of it. And I was wondering if you can talk a bit more, talk a bit about like I don't know, like this piece, and then also like decisions on like the crafts and bowls and the fruits and.
So this is a Ford F-150, which is the #1 selling truck in Utah. I think it's probably up there in the United States too, but specifically in Utah. And it's called, the overall piece is Riding in Cars with Boys, which I think you mentioned. I don't know, I think for me, I don't always feel like art needs to, and I like when you can either choose to like take or leave the humor. So I think like filling the bed with these sort of phallic objects, like I'm playing with this idea like Utah doesn't really love sex and sexual innuendo. It's, at least in my experience growing up, it was kind of this thing you ignored, and I'd like to push up against that a little bit. And so the title and filling the bed with these like kind of silly eggplant, bananas, zucchini, it's definitely, if you are looking for it, it's probably one of the more sexual pieces in the show.
Yeah, it's like the most like it's
like
the
not
most
sexual.
masculine
Yeah.
and then the most like sexual piece, which is which is a huge like departure from like your asshole buddies. And then and then the piece about what
Dolph Lundgren.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's at the front.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in exploring that, it's just sort of kind of finding these anchoring moments where I was just trying to understand like how I conceptualized gay identity, I guess, in a way. Like the one at the front, Dolph, or what do I call it, Master of My Universe,
Circa 1990.
Like, I remember being like 6 years old, seeing this blonde man dressed as He-Man and just being like, wow. Like, not having the words or like the understanding of what I was feeling, but like knowing I was feeling something. And then going from that to like discovering sexuality in the back of a truck to then like the Asshole Buddies, which is like the cover of like a pulp erotica that I found in my early 20s.
Yeah.
And like all three of those things are probably not the best sources to learn about like gay sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's, I'm sure at least I hope now there's like a better way that gay adolescents are learning how sex works between two guys, but like this was, like these pieces kind of stand out as like me working that out.
Yeah. And things that you learned in the 90s.
Yeah, that's definitely
Yeah.
90s.
Yeah. Can we, I also want to say too that as a person who grew up in the 90s, like I feel like all these pieces, you know, the Elizabeth Taylor pieces are like things that were like also embedded in like my memory as like a child watching or spending literally every day in the summer watching TV. You know, so I love Elizabeth Taylor, and I think that Elizabeth Taylor was such a beautiful woman, and I think like in the 90s for me, she like exemplified like strong, independent, like a strong, independent woman who was like completely okay with her sexuality. You know, and so like I don't know what white diamond smells like, but I would assume that white diamond probably smell like
I don't know, like a department store fragrance section is what I imagine. Like every grandma fragrance.
yeah, like flowers
and like vanilla.
Yeah. Now I'm like, so do they still sell it?
I don't know. Do fragrances evolve? Would 1990s white diamonds look like today's?
Well, we can definitely eBay it. But you know, like I also am very familiar with like the LA gels, right? So like a lot of these things like are like I am familiar with, and I just like, for instance, like that heart, right, with like the flames. Like I'm thinking about like those Ed Hardy, right? Like clothes, like and like the people that was like really big in the 90s, like you know, and I know that those aren't like for me, like I know that that's not like a direct reference for you, but it is like for me, right? And so I just like there's something really fascinating about that, and then also like the Siegfried and Roy. Can we go and talk about that piece?
Yeah.
Okay, so this piece is titled, I'm going to probably butcher the name, but I'm going to try to say it anyways.
Okay.
So Siegfried and Montclair,
Montecore,
the tigers that attacked Roy. So can you just talk a little bit about, actually can you tell us the story behind this piece? Because I think the story is completely fascinating. I was just like, what? You told me?
Yeah, so I don't know, I think Siegfried and Roy, for me, like you were saying, 90s kid, they had like a cartoon at one point. They had like a lifelong contract with one of the casinos in Las Vegas. They were like considered sort of Vegas. And I remember my first time going there, like seeing a billboard of them. Probably felt a similar way to the first time I saw He-Man as Dolph Lundgren. But like they had like the hair and the sequins, and they were wearing animal print and like on this billboard, and they were so gorgeous. And they also like never talked about their sexuality, but it was very much like Liberace, like kind of just not said but understood that they were like gay or whatever.
It's so fascinating because I did not know that until I was like probably an adult.
Yeah, I mean, and I think like being like an adolescent in the 90s, like constantly searching for like some sort of representation, and it usually was like Elton John, Liberace, Siegfried and Roy, people that wore like sparkles. But when I was in my 20s, probably I think this was like 2009, I was coming back from Miami, and I got laid over here in Minneapolis on my way back to Salt Lake where I was living, and I got bumped from the flight. And so they were gonna reroute me through Vegas, and they put me in first class. So I got put in first class, and I was sitting there, and I was probably recovering from whatever was going on in Miami, and it was a full flight, and the only seat empty was the one next to me, and we were like obviously waiting for someone, and this man kind of rushes in. He's like older, blonde, like wearing like the bejeweled butt jeans, sits down. I have my headphones in, I kind of just ignore him, and we take off. And then about halfway through the flight flight attendant came around and gave the drink service, so I took my headphones off, and he turns to me and said, "Oh, so you speak to me now?" So as they're talking to this gentleman next to me, and as he's talking about being like an entertainer, and he lives in Vegas, he's going home, he was at the Mayo Clinic, and we just like, and I start to realize like, oh shit, I'm sitting next to Siegfried. Like I figured it out, but I didn't want to let him know that. So I just kept letting him talk, and then at some point I said, "Well, what kind of entertainer are you?" And he said, "I am Siegfried from Siegfried and Roy." And so like by the end of the flight, like he was crying, I was crying, like we were drinking our cocktails, and he was telling me about like the attack on Roy from the tiger, and like how that changed like their act, and they had to cancel the show, and like they had to add a different house on their property, and like this whole just like, I felt like Barbara Walters. It was just, it pulled the curtain back on this kind of idea about these entertainers that I'd grown up looking at, and he was always they were like unattainable, like they didn't talk about their personal lives, and that is sort of what you were kind of taught as like a gay queer person, was that you just like, you aren't able to talk about that stuff in person, and to have that kind of laid out for me. It was still kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge. In 2009, he didn't come out and say anything explicitly, but it was pretty understood what he was talking about most of the time. But that was like a pretty bizarre, so we got off the plane in Vegas, and I think I called my mom and was like, "I just sat next to Siegfried and Roy." And so that was the Siegfried and Roy story.
I was just completely in awe by this story, and then like just hearing you tell this story again, I'm also really curious how I just thinking about like Siegfried and Roy, Elizabeth Taylor, Julie Garland, like just these people who or like these, I don't know, like entertainers who like shape your like understanding, or like your idea of like, I don't what would you call it, like
I don't know, like I think, or I keep going back to this word that I said to you earlier today, like a portal. I think they were kind of like this portal into a different world that I had no experience with.
Yeah.
I mean, LA looks was probably like the most glamorous thing like I was used to. So like so, Judy Garland, Siegfried and Roy, like these epic action movies, the set pieces, all this stuff like was large, like was creating these spaces that were so out of touch with what my reality was, and they were queer. And
Yeah. Well, I'm also thinking too, like going back to like the first piece we talked about, Margaret, Fletcher, who has no face.
She has no face.
There's something about that I just like, yeah, and I think like for me, they're the like maybe a portal into queerness. I know a lot of queer folks that love Elizabeth Taylor. I'm just thinking about like the history of Judy Garland, right? And then also like thinking about like Siegfried and Roy, and I think for me they are like, especially like growing up in the 90s, like they were these sort of larger than life personalities, glamorous, old Hollywood, but also like thinking about it now, there's like just queerness in them. And I think about them.
Yeah.
And I think about how it resonates in the work, and whether it is like on the surface or like needing to peel back the layers of the images, right? I'm also really interested in your use of like animals and objects in place of like human beings.
Yeah.
Or like, as like a way to talk about, it's like you're not like casting a mode of like Elizabeth Taylor, but like the perfume bottle, right? Or like her dogs, right? Or like, an old portrait of the artist isn't a portrait of like a physical portrait of you, but it's like all these things that like embodied you, thinking about like Siegfried and Roy, like it isn't about like these like it isn't about like them as people, but it's like about like the objects that like
The
represent,
costume.
right? Yeah, there's something about that, and I was wondering if you can like, speak to that.
Yeah, I think like for me, I think I had this like thing with cowboys for a while where I was like using these white cowboy dudes to talk about being from the West and masculinity and kind of like the pageantry of that and the costumes of that. And I realized like that felt like I was sort of endorsing this kind of like white male, like frontiersman kind of stereotype. And so like, and as I like kind of thought about it more, I wanted to like use maybe icons or things that you can associate or access without using bodies. Like I don't want to feel like I'm endorsing like a body type or like perpetuating like, like you said, like these are queer things. These happen to be white people, but like queerness comes in all different forms, and I feel like that is like the common thread, and I don't want to necessarily like endorse a certain body type or skin color.
Yeah. All right. So, Chase, this piece is titled "King of the Road." Heartburn. Can you talk a little bit about this piece and your decisions behind the colors and the tile that the heart sits on top of?
Yeah. So like this one, this King of the Road, and then the King of the Road bow in the other room. They kind of came from sort of like these men that drive big jacked up Ford F-150s and seeing them on the road and seeing like the back windows or some part of the truck like decorated with like decals, and usually it's like flames or skulls. So it's like there was something really sweet to me about this like overtly masculine vehicle, these dudes that really want to drive these like, they take the time to jack up these trucks, and then they like want to decorate
Mhm.
and use pattern.
Yeah.
But there's something interesting to me about the fact that like, you know, they seem to only think that they can use flame and skulls, like sometimes together.
Yeah.
But so this piece, I started just with these tiles actually, and I hand carved them, and then I felt like I wanted to take that a little bit further, so I just started kind of forming shapes one day and came up with this heart, and then carved in the flames to match. And I don't know, I think it's that balance between kind of, we were talking earlier, like feminine, maybe feminine hearts are considered feminine, and then like throwing on this like overtly masculine, slightly tacky pattern of flames.
I was thinking about the word tender.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you know, like the bows, like they are like feminine, but also like there's something really like tenderly, like there's something really tender about them, and I think like the hearts do that for me too. And then also like again, I'm like thinking back to like Ed Hardy and his like that clothing line and how like masculine.
But it's
Like-
so
like-
it had rhinestones.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and like thinking about like the people that bought it and wore it too, and so yeah, I mean, I think that that's what like, you know, the references for me, that's, you know, it works really well
Yeah.
in that respect. Yeah.
Awesome.
So, what are the hours and where people can catch this exhibition online?
Online.
Yeah.
Hours are 24/7 on.
Online.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you so
Hey, thank you.
much.
You've been so great and supportive of me, and I'm
Oh.
glad we could do this together.
Well, Chase, I am just, like, you've always been like this, like, so, little unknown
History.
fact,
Yeah.
history. So Chase was a student of mine at the university in beginning photography. Like, you've always been like the ideal student. So I think about like when a teacher has an ideal student, what kind of student they would want, and like you pop up, because I think like what you did was you soaked in everything that I taught and you applied it to like the things that you were making, which was always like, you know, and I see those things like even now in this exhibition, right? You know, like learning the Photoshop, the repetition of things, you know, they're all applied in this space. And so I always think it's like such a great thing, like when you have, I don't know if I want to call you a student.
Past.
Yeah, but like it's always like really wonderful when you have people that come into your life who take your classes and then are like applying the things that like they've learned in like in your class like in their practice. So it's been such a treat to like see you evolve, and like it's gonna be even more of a treat to see you evolve in your MFA program. So I'm so proud of you.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you guys, that was great.
Great.